Am I on? All right. So, how is everyone this evening? Good, good. I am too. So, I'm just going to jump right in. I've been cramming away in the book of Mark for, I don't know, a month at least, maybe a little bit longer. I guess I feel like I've read the Bible a couple of times straight through, and I just get stuck in these sections, or I don't usually even get stuck at a whole chapter at one time like I have now, but I've just started at the beginning, and I've worked back through, and just back through, and back through, and back through, and it just seems like it's amazing how we can read scriptures over and over again, and then things will just jump out of the page at us that, like, man, I've read that so many times, but I never really got that, or it never really had relevance in my life like it does right now. So I'm sure that, like I said, we've all read these scriptures. I'm going to talk about it sometime. But God just spoke to me through these verses, and what he did is he enlightened what I and what all of us are called to do, or really what he commands us to do as we go about this earth as believers. So I kind of broke it down into three different sections. The first one is, it says we're called to believe. That says that in Mark. If you're here tonight, you probably do believe, or you wouldn't be here. All of us are on different levels of belief, depending on, what's been going on in our lives. Sometimes we seem like we maybe have doubts. Other times we're close to seeing something miraculous happen, and we can't be shaken. Like the father that came to the disciples that couldn't heal his boy. He said, "I believe, but help me with my unbelief." So we're all kind of in that territory usually at some point or another. We're kind of moving up and down. We shouldn't be, but I feel like I am at least. The second part is once we believe, then we're called to act. Stephen, can I get that Acts 1:8 real quick? And that's kind of the dividing line between a lot of us. Everybody believes, but then it's hard sometimes to act. And it says, but ye shall receive power. That power is dunamis, and that's specifically for miraculous power. So, but we shall receive power. After that, the Holy Ghost is come upon you, and ye shall be witnesses unto me in Jerusalem, and in all Judea, and in Samaria, and unto the uttermost parts of the earth. And that word witnesses is martys in the Greek, which is where we get the word for martyr at. And it says, the definition says, we shall be a witness at any cost. And even to death. I mean, that's what a martyr is. It's somebody that dies for the faith. And then 2 Peter 1:21 says, we have also a more sure word of prophecy, whereunto ye do well that ye take heed, as unto a light that shineth in a dark place, until the day dawn and the day star arises in your hearts. Knowing this, I guess I didn't give you 20, I read 22, but 21 is, for the prophecy came not in old time by the will of man, but holy men of God spake as they were moved by the Holy Spirit. So they were called to action. They were called to move in the Holy Ghost. And that word is in the Greek is phero. It's to carry a burden. So it's not necessarily an easy thing sometimes. I mean, his burden is light if we're yoked with him, but sometimes we're going to run into tough things in the world that we're going to have to deal with. And then lastly, once we've begun to walk out what we believe, folks are going to think we're crazy. They're going to think we're out of our minds. And these are the beginning stages of persecution. I mean, we hear that word a lot, where we kind of think of it more as a physical thing rather than just a mental or a emotional thing. But the beginning of that is going to be an emotional or a mental thing. And we're going to dive into all three of these one at a time. So a lot of us are going to say that the examples that are given to us by the disciples were for them then, not for necessarily us now. But there were many more examples than just them. In Luke 10, Jesus sends out the 70. I really feel like I have a connection with that verse and those 70 folks. I'd come to find out that it seems as though Luke might have been one of those 70. So if we can't be one of the 12, then we should jump on board with the 70 and the things that they had done in Luke 10. Jesus gave them the same authority as he gave the 12. He sent them out 2 by 2 with nothing, and you go around and you preach the gospel and you do the things that I commanded you to do. And I really thought that was interesting, and I did a little bit of study on Luke and how vital he was. He wasn't one of the 12, but he was all along with Paul, and a lot of places where Paul's talking about we this and we that. A lot of those situations it's Luke, and he's right there along beside Paul. So first, we are called to believe, but believe what? Obviously, God is real. There's a Father, there's a Son, there's a Holy Ghost. We all know that. We all talk about that. That the Bible's real and the Bible's true. It's really coming under attack a lot lately. The thing that they read about TikTok, but I think that's been going on, for a long, long time. And I've talked to guys at work and stuff that are really gruff, or I used to, I guess, that were, hardened, worldly men. And, a lot of them, they don't even know what's in the Bible, but they still, obviously, Grandma believed, and, Grandpa believed, or people around them believed, and they are American, and we're one nation under God, and, they have a sense of belief that the Bible's real, but they really don't know what's in it. But after I've studied the prophecies that were fulfilled in Jesus' lifetime, just any of the prophecies in the Old Testament that reflect the New Testament, if you really study these out, there's no way that they can be not true. With numerology and all of that, you start digging into that. That alone is another confirmation that you can do the math and it's real. And I've also studied into these hidden Bible codes that just absolutely blow your mind once you get into them. And there's no way that this thing can't be true. And not just true, but all the little intricate details and the bits and pieces that you're just not sure about. If you want to dig in deep enough, you'll find out that there's something to them, that there's truth in there. So it's kind of like a little child. Obviously, I got a little experience with that. You don't have to get a child to believe that you're their father or their mother. I mean, even if they're not your biological child, if you've been around them long enough, they just know that they know that they know, and you have to tell them otherwise. If you're not actually their biological father, you have to tell them at some point, like, hey, I'm not really your dad. And they're just like, it's hard for them to believe that you're not their actual dad. I had a cousin that, I'm 46, so he's probably 56, something like that. And even as a kid, I knew that his dad wasn't his real dad. Everybody knew, except for him. And he was like 35 years old or so, and somebody in passing conversation said something about this guy, and he's like, well, who's that? I'm like, that's your dad. And he's like, no, my dad's Bud. And he's like, no, your dad's Larry. And he's just like blown away, and he was so mad at his mom. I'm like, I wouldn't have wanted to really been there, but I could imagine it was a tense thing. And for him to not find out, and to find out from somebody that was younger than him even, and it really upset him for a long, long time, and I'm sure it did. But, even children, they believe things that their parents tell them, or believe things that their parents believe in. And I told the guys Sunday night about Ellie. We were down in Kentucky last week, and we come back from the meeting, and it was, I don't know, close to 10 o'clock at night. And we're in a big, nice hotel, and there's seating all over the lobby and everywhere. And these guys were sitting around, like, right in front of the elevators, and there was 5 or 6 guys. And there was at least 20 bottles of liquor sitting on the table. And they weren't, like, belligerent. One guy was like he was passed out. And they were, nicely dressed guys. They were obviously staying in a nice hotel. But there's 20 bottles of liquor sitting around, and they're drinking. And we got all the kids. We just kind of go around and get on the elevator. And we get up to the room, and Ellie's like, Dad, aren't you going to pray for them people? And I'm like, looking at Shayna, and she's looking like, and she really put me on the spot, and you can't say, well, no, I'm not praying for those people, because she believes that that's what you're supposed to do, but I don't want to say, yeah, let's go pray for them either, so I just kind of like ignored her, but you're not ignoring Ellie, not at all. So then Max chimes in, and they're like, all right, now there's 2 of them, and Shayna's like, you're going to have to go back down. And I'm like, all right, which obviously, I guess I feel called to talk to people, even if I'm not, like, seeing miraculous things, but just sharing the gospel with them and telling them what God's done for me. And so I'm like, all right. So we go back down, and I'm like, we're on the elevator. I'm like, we got to be cool about this. You can't just, like, come up and hit them with it, like, you don't know who these guys are, And I'm like, let's get a pop first. So we walk by them, we go get a pop, and we come, which I'm probably building up my courage, I guess, I don't know. And which is me being me, fearing that God's not going to have my back. So I finally, because I'm a schmoozer, I can talk to anybody at any time about anything. So I'm just like, and they're tall talking, except for the one guy that's completely passed out. Like, you see him like, and he's out. I'm just, hey guys, how you doing? And they stopped talking, and we all got to talking. They were mostly from Ohio. One guy was from South Carolina, so we got to talking to them a little bit. And so, what do you guys, because they're in a hotel, so everybody's doing something, They were actually coming to Kentucky to buy a barrel of whiskey, believe it or not. So, and they're like, well, it was worked out perfect. What are you doing down here? I'm like, oh, we went down to this revival meeting this week. There's a whole week long of classes and services, and oh, that's cool. And so, just got to talking with them a little bit and just telling them how good God is, and what a difference He's made in our lives, and just asked them, hey, is there anything we can pray for you about? And they're just kind of looking at each other like, wow, is this guy really going to pray for us? And he's like, no, I think we're good. And so I'm just kind of like, I'm like, what about this guy? Like, he's not dead, is he? And they're like no, he's fine. And so the one guy chimes in like, yeah, we got a lot of traveling to do. Like, we could just pray for traveling safety. I'm like, well, that's good. We'll take that, And so we prayed for everybody and went around and introduced everybody and shook hands and just got to talk to him a little bit. And Ellie was impressed, and which we didn't really do anything other than talk to people. And nobody got mad at us and wanted to hit us or anything like that. It was a good experience, and it built my faith too. It built me up. So kids, they believe whatever you tell them. Which we've told our kids a lot of things over the years, I think, just to shut them up about things. So can you get Matthew 16, 15, and 16? Still on believed. So Jesus is saying to Matthew, He saith unto them, but whom ye say that I am? And Simon Peter answered and said, Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. So Peter obviously believed. At that point in his time with Jesus, he had spent time with the Father and had come to a solid truth in his heart that Jesus was actually the Christ, because that was a big question. Everybody didn't know for sure, especially the Pharisees. They knew they were supposed to be waiting for the Messiah, but it'd be like us today if we knew a guy in town that was some weirdo walking around for the last 10 years, and then he'd come out one day and said he was Jesus. Not that Jesus was a weirdo, but the things that he did and the things that he said made him look like a weirdo to the average person. And would we believe that that's who that was too? In Genesis 12:1, obviously Abraham believed, and it was counted as righteousness. But I'd always kind of wondered about like how this, because he was the father of faith. How did this first interaction between Abram and God go down? And it doesn't really give a lot of details. He was obviously born a pagan Chaldean, and God told him to leave his family one day. It says, Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And if you do any research, I always try to research things out like this that the Bible doesn't necessarily say about. There's a lot of other writings and things, and I didn't go deep into it, but there's a lot of details about some of his family and where he came from. And, from what I had seen and read, it sounds like he was fed up with the way things were going with his family, as far as their pagan gods didn't have any power, and he understood that. So there had to be some breaking point where he had an idea in his mind that the things that his family and the people that he came from and the pagan deities that they were all worshiping didn't have any power, didn't have any authority. So what are we doing given all this time and attention and affection to these wooden and stone statues that everybody's putting all this money and time and effort into? And that led me over to Luke 9, 49 and 50. There's a couple other situations that I found, because there's basically in the Old Testament, you got Abraham's the father of faith, and then as you get into the New Testament, you've got Jesus and the disciples, and all those people were trying to convince everybody else in the world that God was real and that Jesus was the Messiah. So in Luke 9, 49 and 50, and John answered and said, Master, we saw one casting out devils in thy name, and we forbade him, because he followeth not with us. And Jesus said unto him, Forbid him not, for he that is not against us is for us. So that's always just kind of a weird thing, like, where'd this guy come from? He obviously the disciples knew Jesus from right at the beginning, and they had traveled with him. At least some of them were with him most all the time, it says, other than he went to the garden to pray at night. I mean, I don't know who this guy is or where he came from, or what his story is. You know, you read that, I'm sure. It doesn't really say anything about it. But obviously at some point, whether he had just been a face in the crowd and had seen what these guys were doing and were mimicking the things that they were doing and saying the things that they were saying, but he was casting out devils. And we read in, it's slipping my mind right now, was it the sons of, were they, Sceva, yeah, where they were casting out devils, and the devil came to him and said, Paul I know and Jesus I know, but who are you? So obviously this guy had come across Jesus in the real sense of the matter, and he was able to do it, and Jesus supported him and said he was doing fine as long as he's not for us. Obviously the sons of Sceva were not for Jesus, or those devils would have known that. The guy in the temple who saw baby Jesus. Mm-hmm. Right, that were living by the prophecies even, you know, that understood that those were real and they were actually righteous in their thinking and righteous in their waiting. But another one's in Numbers 22:8, and I hadn't read anything about Balaam in a long time, and you kind of brought that up the other day, and we love that story. We saw some pictures of Gabby back there. She was, I don't know, 13 or 14 maybe, and we used to act a lot of stuff out with the kids, and we did a Balaam story, and she was the donkey, and she made these big long ears, and I don't know why we just loved it. That one kicked in, and everybody seemed like they participated and they had fun. But Balaam, from what I can gather, was not an Israelite either. Balak came to him and wanted him to curse the Israelites. He was a Mesopotamian prophet, is what the Strongs say about him. But his name, I thought, was interesting. It means not of the people. So I kind of thought that's another one, that obviously God must have spoken to him or revealed himself through whatever means. It doesn't really say. It's kind of a whole, you know, kind of a guessing area right there. But he's obviously not of the people. He wasn't of Abraham. He wasn't part of the 12. He was another prophet from another wherever, but God obviously spoke to him and let him know that these are my people. Don't mess with them. It said, and he said unto them, lodge here this night. This is Balaam speaking. And he said unto them, lodge here this night, and I will bring you word again, and the Lord shall speak unto me. And the princes of Moab abode with Balaam. So again, obviously he spoke with God, and he understood who God was and the fact that he was the one true God and that the Israelites were his chosen people. So he obviously believed well enough to not mess with the Israelites. So Romans 10:17, 10:17 is our number at my house. So then faith cometh by hearing, and by hearing the word of God. So God can choose to speak to anyone he wants. It's up to the individual to hear and to respond. So each one of us, it's up to us. God's loud, and his voice travels all around the planet. He's speaking to everybody if you're just willing to tune in your radio to hear what he's got to say.
If we go back to Abraham himself, he lived in a land where he practiced.
Right.
For whatever reason, it wasn't going to touch, but he believed that they were
Mm-hmm.
so God spoke to him.
Yeah, I mean, like even Mesopotamia, the Chaldeans, Nebuchadnezzar, all these people came from this one little, that they call the cradle of the earth now. I mean, that's where supposedly the Sumerians, all this written text, math, a lot of these things originated in this little area, Iraq, Iran, places like that. The wise men came from the east. They were Chaldeans or Mesopotamian wise men, so there was a lot going on in that part of the world. So when the disciples had heard Jesus had risen from the dead, they were uncertain whether to believe or not. You guys all have read through these stories, but this is where I really, in Mark 16, was where I really was taken. I read this before, but for some reason it just seems to me like, I guess because it was the last thing that Jesus told the disciples before he left. And I feel like it's the thing that we need to be picking up on the most before he comes back, because he's going to come back in like fashion. And I don't necessarily, I mean, I suppose that means he left in the clouds and he's coming back that same fashion, but I mean, I think it's even carries a little bit deeper that the earth is going to be like it was in the times when he left. You're going to have a lot of chaos and a lot of things obviously going on. But in Mark 16:4, it said, afterward he appeared unto the 11 as they sat at meat, and upbraided them, or he rebuked them with their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they believed not them which had seen him after he was risen. So from where I searched up, Jesus had told them in the Gospels up to 21 times of the account that he would be raised up on the third day. Now, some of them probably overlap between Matthew and Mark. You know, it's the same story told in different Gospels. So he told them plenty of times that I'm going to die and I'm going to come back. So when he did, they all just didn't get it. You know, I don't know how they didn't get it, but I'm sure we'd struggle with it too if we were there. But when he came back and he revealed himself to them, he convinced them right then and there that I am the Messiah, and that I was raised up on the third day, just like I told you over and over again. And the hardness of heart, you know, we all have hardness of heart with all sorts of things. And I've wondered many times, like especially with the Israelites in the wilderness, like how did you guys see these miracles, the Red Sea parted and all these things? How could you see all these things and not just be completely overwhelmed with belief? But there's things that we see all the time, you know, smaller miracles, obviously, but miracles nonetheless. And we just, even if we believe for a minute, things just kind of fade off, and that's the human nature. We're a stiff-necked people just like they were. And there's things that we see even just changed lives, not just completely miraculous events where pain's instantly gone. Or I've had several healings in my own body in the last couple of years. I'm still waiting on one right now, but it's coming. So in verse 16:15, and he said unto them, go ye into the world and preach the gospel to every creature. So go, that's that call to action. So literally in one verse, he's beating them up because they didn't believe. In the next verse, he's telling them to go out and do all the things I taught you in the last 3.5 years I've been with you. So again, we're like that too. You know, we're up and down, you know, the Daisy with the she loves me not, she loves me. You know, we're like that back and forth. And even with our own relationships, that's real. We can be married for a long time, and one day we're doing great. The next day we can't stand them. The next day we're right back into, you know, the honeymoon phase, and we're kind of a fickle people. In Mark 16:16, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, or sozoed, but he that believeth not shall be damned. And that's katakrino in the Greek, and it's judged and sentenced. So there's a big difference there between being just judged and being judged and sentenced. So it's a matter of belief. And if we're able to convince ourselves to open our hearts up to him, we don't have to be judged and sentenced. And it's just that easy, because if we open our hearts up to believe, then all the rest of it's just going to come right in. Mark 16:17. And these signs shall follow them that believe. In my name they shall cast out devils. They shall speak in new tongues. And I'll go ahead and read 18 too. They shall take up serpents, and if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. They shall lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover. So that's the biggest one right there. I put the big star on that one. So these signs shall follow them that believe. And in my name they shall cast out devils. So I thought that was kind of odd too. The first thing he lists is they should cast out devils. It's just not a big thing anymore. When you read it back in the New Testament, where they're going around preaching the gospel to people, it seemed like everybody that came up had a devil. And I really think that the world has put in psychological names and medical names on those devils, and we've all taken off with it and ran with it. I've only really seen one time that I assumed this guy, but I'm still kind of skeptical. Maybe he was faking. I don't know. But it would be awful hard for this man, the way that I'd seen him manifesting a demon. It was at a big a big revival meeting. There was hundreds and hundreds of people there, and for this man just to be sitting in a seat doing the things that he was doing, and it definitely, a crowd of people came around and people recognized it, and I seen him the next day and he looked fine. So he definitely got prayer that day. But the fact that there's people walking around every day with devils, I mean, even Araya, I'm not trying to speak anything over her, but it drives you nuts because she'll say like we and us a lot, help us. It's like, it's scary when you hear it over and over again. I mean, at first we didn't really put a lot of stock into it, but us is us. She's not stupid. She understands. She can read and write and do math and things you guys wouldn't even believe. She tells time on a regular clock and things like that. So she's not dumb at all. And maybe she understands even more than what we understand what's going on. We've obviously had her prayed for many, many times. And there was a time back in the day we'd bring her up here and she would throw an absolute fit when you'd pray for her. Now she's got a prayer that she prays. You can't understand most of it, but she's, Dear Heavenly Father, in Jesus' name, amen. And so, I mean, she's got a prayer down, but it's something that she's memorized, so I'm not sure. But they're out there. Mm-hmm. No. No, I mean, if you did, you might as well just pack up and go home and you turn on the TV. Yeah. Well, even with her, like, obviously can drive you nuts sometimes, and you get mad, but then the way she responds to anger versus love is, if you get angry at her, she just fires up and she's 10 times worse. But if you just go and give her hugs and start rubbing on her, then, that's the only thing that tones her down, that turns her off. But, so, I don't know. Back in 18, it says, they shall take up serpents, and if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. They shall lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover. So these are all, obviously, snake handlers, things like that. I don't think that's necessarily what he's talking about. I think it's just more of the dangers of the fallen world can hurt us. But when we have authority in the fallen world, then we can turn things around and make the dangerous things safe. I mean, you're walking around in Jesus' time, there was all kinds of dangers that we have our own dangers today. Obviously, their dangers might have been safer than our dangers, actually. But we get 19. So then after the Lord had spoken unto them, he was received up into heaven and sat on the right hand of God. So after he had spoken with them, he was taken up into heaven. So again, that's the very last thing he said to them. So I mean, if you were going away for a long time and your dad's gonna, like a kid going to college or something, your dad's gonna get all the best stuff that he can tell you before you take off for life, and he's gonna save the best for that last moment. Or a football coach, you go out for the big championship game, he's going to tell you all the most important details of whatever he's got to tell you before he sends you out on your own. And I really think that's what Jesus was doing there. He's telling us that signs and wonders shall follow them that believe. So if we are sitting here tonight and we believe, then signs and wonders should follow us. They should accompany us, is what the New King James used instead of follow. And I know that's probably harder than what it sounds like me up here talking, because I've prayed for lots and lots of people, and I've definitely made influences and impacts on their lives, and I probably shy away from the cripples and the wheelchairs and the blinds and things like that, I guess, when I'm out and about. But I think all these things, like we talked about Kentucky, this is the year of the turnaround, and we're going to start to see these things like we've never seen before. So then in Matthew 16:20, and they went forth, so they got into action, and preached everywhere, the Lord working with them and confirming the word with signs following or accompanying. Amen. So they just made a complete turnaround themselves in 6 verses. They went from not believing that Jesus was the Son of God and that everything they learned was true to doing exactly what Jesus told them to do. And they went out and made it happen, despite their period of unbelief. So all of these are the will of God for us who believe. And I think we all know that deep down in our hearts, no matter what else is going on in our lives, that, the will of the Father is for us to lay hands on the sick and see them recovered. Belief that we are his children and all that involves. We learned a lot about that down in Kentucky too, that, we're the child of the king, not the servant or the slave of the king. And I've heard this not long ago, that if you're a wealthy family and your parents have servants or butlers or people like that, and the servant may be allowed to take your Ferrari down to the dealership to get the oil changed, but he's not just allowed to joyride it around. But if you're the adult responsible son of the wealthy father, you're allowed to drive that car too, and you're probably going to inherit it someday, because it's not yours now, but it will be yours. And we all need to walk in that familyness, or that family circle, that we are the child of the king, so we deserve these things, and we should be able to walk in the things that our Father tells us we should walk in. We need to believe that we have power to turn things around, that dunamis power, not for our own, not necessarily for our own reward or for our own uplifting, but for God's plan for this world. We have belief that God is Lord, and we will be received up into heaven just like Jesus did. When he comes back, we're going to go up there with him, and we're going to spend eternity with him. So, once we think and act the way Jesus did, persecution's not far behind. You see it all over the world, and even in America today, you see people being persecuted, and it looks like all sorts of different things. Depending on where you live or what time in history. This country, Christians were persecuted by, American Indians or whoever were here first before missionaries came over. They just didn't have the same belief systems. But it's easy to believe when the times are good. And the times have been good, and they are still good, but they're getting darker and darker. And it's a much tougher thing to believe when times get tough. And we can see that already, even with not just the government, but more of a personal between families or between coworkers, the types of persecution that I'm going to talk about. And what we see now is more like times are tough when those we love don't like the things we say and do when we're talking about Jesus, or maybe it's conviction or whatever it is. They just don't want to have anything to do with what we have going on. I have 7 brothers and sisters, and my mom was a believer, and she's gone now, so it's just me. I'm the only believer out of all of them. And we get along, and we love each other, and we tell each other we love each other. We don't talk regularly, and we don't hang out a lot. If we go to a graduation party or something, we come early and we leave early, because everything's about drinking and partying. And everybody's successful for the most part. So for me, and I'm not saying I'm not successful, I have things that they wouldn't dream of having. But in the world, I'm not as successful as they are. I don't have the nicest houses they do. I don't have the nicest cars and big campers and vacations and all the things that they do. But so for me to go and tell them that what I have going on is better than what they have going on, they would laugh at me. So usually I don't. I just shut up. I get in what I can get in, but they're probably the hardest people to minister to, because I was right there with them 10 years ago, probably leading them 10 years ago. But in Mark 3:31 through 35, this is Jesus. He's preaching in a house that's packed full of people. They can't even get in. it says they can't even eat bread, I think it says in here. But there came then his brethren and his mother, and standing without, sent unto him, calling him. So he's up there preaching, the people are pressed in, and they're out here in the edges trying to talk to him, so they have to send word through the crowd that they're out there. And they told Jesus, Behold, thy mother and thy brethren without seek for thee. And he answered them, saying, Who is my mother or my brethren? And he looked around about on them which sat about him, and said, Behold, my mother and brethren. For whosoever shall do the will of God, the same is my brother and my sister and my mother. So, we all have family in this same situation. You got to kind of wonder. I mean, I've got family that are just out there, and I'm not saying they can't get a hold of me, but we can't really make a connection because there's a gap between us, and it's a spiritual gap. It's not a physical gap. Mark 3:20 and 21 says, And the multitude cometh together again, so that they could not so much as eat bread. And when his friends heard of it, they went out to lay hold of him, for they said, He is beside himself. So 3:20 and 21 comes first, and then 31 and 35. So his friends or his family, those are the people that are talking about in 31 through 35. That's why they came to see him. I've read that before when he asked, Who's my mother and my brethren? But behold, you guys are my mother and my brother. I never really got that. But that's why they came. That's why they were trying to press through that crowd to get to Jesus. They could not so much as eat bread, and when his friends heard it, they went out to lay hold of him, for they said, He is beside himself. So, that's beside himself. He's crazy. You lost your mind. In Mark 12:12, the Pharisees sought to lay hold of him, but they feared the people. So that's not a good thing. They came up to get a hold of me, physically take him out of that situation. In the garden when the Pharisees came, when Judas betrayed Jesus, that's the same words they used there. They came to lay hold of him. So it makes me wonder, did they lost faith in Jesus? Maybe it was the pressure of Jesus' fame or his infamy at that point. It doesn't really say why they came to lay hold of him like that, why his family and his friends came there that day to lay hold of him. In John 2:1 through 5, this is the day of the wedding feast, when Jesus' first miracle. And it's just a little transition between Mary at the beginning of his ministry and Mary at the end of his ministry. It says, On the third day there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there, and both Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage. And when they wanted wine, the mother of Jesus said unto him, They have no wine. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come. And his mother saith unto the servants, Whatever he saith unto you, do it. So it's the same mother who said. So she obviously believed him in the beginning, but by the time you get to the end of Mark, she's there with his brothers and family to lay hold of him because she didn't believe anymore. So just kind of wondered, if we're walking around through society and you're doing the things that Jesus said, doing the things that Jesus did, and you're causing up a stir the way that he caused up a stir with the way the temple was, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they could have kicked you out of the basically you'd have been taken out of the church, and most of your life was wrapped around the church and the religious belief system. And now Jesus is going to die, he's going to go away, or he's going to get in prison, he's going to get something. She probably feels like there's not a good end to this thing, and she's trying to lay hold of him and take him back home and smack some sense into him or something, like, you got to stop this, they're going to kill you. And
That's a good point, though, because, you see Satan never changes his playbook.
mm-mm.
He's doing the same thing right now, getting family members that are explaining. I don't know if you're deep into it, but like one of the ministers down at the conference the other time, we talked to someone. There's ministers that aren't participating in the conference and stuff because it has to do with belief and stands the temple and shrine.
Yeah.
So see, we're seeing right now the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Even David being raised king over the Lord had, whenever the enemy come in and stole the truth and destroy the
Yeah.
because, it's like all of a sudden the pressure, and I think that's something that we got to be really mindful of. As these days go on the way we're going, we don't let the pressures of the world change our mindsets to where faith and believe, because it can.
Hmm.
When you look at the people, and I'm not picking on anybody, please don't take it wrong, but those people walked out of this church and were told, I'm dreaming.
Yeah.
And the one minister from Jonathan, Florida, he said, there are so many churches down there that are suffering because
Mm. I mean,
people won't come back to church. The bigger churches, or he said they're running 10 or 20% of the people they used to, but they can't, the budget is not allowing them.
yeah. Well, Shelley and I talked about that the other day about, like, I could probably almost count on one hand, certainly two hands. I've been here 8 or 9 years now, I guess, of the people that have been here as long as I have. And it's a little church, so that makes a big difference when you're talking about a family. And I mean, it's about like the disciples and Jesus' personal family and the families of the disciples. And you either totally in and totally committed, no matter what happened. If you agreed, you didn't agree, or you were trying to get out of the situation. I really feel like that's what they were trying to do.
But the further your point is, when he went to the cross, he was alone.
Yeah, he was.
Where was everybody there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So then in mm, yeah. Yeah, we're going to talk more about that on the next page too. No, you're fine. That's perfect. And then we talked a little bit down there in Kentucky too about 1 Samuel 17. I'm going to skip that, John, too. Go to 1 Samuel 17:28. So this is after David was anointed king. He's going to go fight Goliath, and Eliab is the oldest brother. So if anyone in Jesse's family line should have been king, it should have been the oldest brother. It says, and Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, Why comest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and thy naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou might seest the battle. So David was persecuted for thinking in a heavenly realm rather than an earthly realm. And there might have been multiple motives going on there. Maybe he couldn't stand David because he was anointed king over him, or he thought his little brother was going to come down and show everybody whose God was real. But there was a real family animosity there between David and his oldest brother. And even with Saul, I mean, he was all about sending David out, knowing in the natural David could never beat that giant, but I'm sure that Saul knew by then that David had been anointed king. It doesn't really say whether he did or not, but the spirit that was within him knew that David had already been anointed king, and then he was on his way out. So what better way to get rid of the new king than to put the armor on him and try to send him right on out there in front of that giant, knowing that David would be killed in the natural. But and I didn't give you this one, but 2 Peter 3:3 says, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers walking after their own lusts. So, I mean, you see a lot of that scoffing going on in the world now. It's always probably been a huge thing. But, like, you silly Bible believers, that's just the dumbest thing you've ever heard. So that kind of leads me into this worldly minded people think that we're crazy. And I always have a little bit of a science bug in me. Not that have half the brain that I need to be into science, but we're talking about the shot. That's pretty science-based. Most area of science thinks that we're crazy now too, and that's coming out more and more and more. Like if you study geology, they say that the Earth is 4.54 billion years old. Recently they found a rock in northwest Canada. They found a rock that's supposedly 4.3 billion years old. And that seems pretty accurate to be knowing how old I found this rock. It's 4.3 billion years old. Right. I don't know. You know what I mean? How can you even comprehend something like I we were looking at scopes not long ago for Jackson's little airsoft rifle, and we click on one thing and it shows you another, and they were checking out the accuracy of these cheap scopes, and they were basically reading the box, and it said, how far it was accurate to, and the guy would physically walk out there. You know what I mean? And okay, yeah, this one's good. This one's not good. So how do you physically measure something that's or like you even talked about a nanosecond, and Philip said it's a 1/1000th of a second. Well, how do you know? I mean, even if a computer can tell you, oh yes, that's 1/1000th of a second, in what realm would it even be necessary to have anything be a billionth of a second long? I mean, I know that there's nuclear clocks. There's one in England and there's one in Colorado that basically the clocks are what's all of our GPS is based off of, and they're the most precise clocks in the world, but they're off by a couple seconds each because of the elevation. The higher you go up, the one slower or faster or whatever. But they say that they need that precision to keep GPS all around the planet doing what it does, and I get that, but it's still not within they're a couple few seconds off, so they don't need that much accuracy. The James Webb Telescope, if you guys seen any of that stuff lately, I mean, some of this stuff is mind-blowing, and the pictures are awesome. I don't know. I'm a skeptic on a lot of things anymore, but they're saying that some of these images that we're seeing, by the time, you guys know the speed of light, if something is out in the galaxy, it takes so long before your eyes can even see that image. And some of these things that we're looking at, by the time they get here, they're already billions of years old. And again, how do you know how far away that is? And how do you know? You obviously can't go out there and measurement. You have no reference, or your brain can't even fathom a billion anything. I mean, I guess there are billionaires that have $1 billion, but to even fathom with your mind $1 billion when you fit in this room, I really don't even know. But you had kind of described a little bit about down there about Satan being ahead of the Israelites and ahead of us in our path. And that seems kind of strange when you hear it at first, but if you dig into it a little bit, he said that Satan had set up the promised land with giants so that when the Israelites got there, they were afraid and they wouldn't be able to fight these people and they wouldn't be able to get into the promised land. But they were believing on based what they had seen with their eyes, not with their heart. And as we're looking around in this world, it's kind of like a hunter or a trapper. He sets a trap ahead of the animal he hunts. Satan doesn't know the future, but he uses our habits and our characteristics to know where we're probably going to be. And he uses bait like things that we're enticed by to reel us in. So I really think that Satan is now using science or knowledge as a trap to get us to doubt God and doubt the Bible. I mean, there's so many things out there that are so amazing and so impressive that we're just willing to count on medicine or count on scientists to fix all these problems for us. Like you were talking about the vaccine, that was the big catch line, is believe the science. Well, come to find out, the science was totally wrong. When they did the big data dump after the vaccine came out, somebody sued them, and they had to basically unload 100,000 pages of documentation from where the drug manufacturers made these vaccines. And most of what they had to say was exactly what some people on the right were saying, that natural immunity was as good, if not better, than what the vaccine actually was. But science is there. It's going to try to explain things better than the Bible. But again, if you dig into this Bible and you take the time to actually study it out, and we can't even, I shouldn't say we, but I personally can barely scratch the surface of that book and the complexity of it. I've barely studied some of these ancient Hebrew scholars that didn't have computers. They barely had pencil and paper, able to figure out these Bible codes and figure out this numerology back in the 12s and 1300s. And the only way they were doing it was they were Bible scholars, but they weren't scribes and Pharisees, like we read in the Bible. They might have been a scribe, but they were righteous and they were waiting for the Messiah, and they were believing that the prophecies were true. But yeah, technology, like I said, can be that bait that's going to lure us in. Quantum computers and just all these things that are out there. It's just absolutely mind-blowing for the average person to be able to wrap your mind around what these people are doing in the name of science. So,
It's like quantum physics out there.
yeah,
I always like science, too. When I study stuff, sometimes I get science. I have a problem believing that it's only quantum physics because they say there are molecules that don't move unless you see them.
right. That's what I heard somebody say that. Well,
How do you know they're not moving? See, it's just like, I think the science is off.
right. Well, and I mean, like if you start looking into, like my son, he's an engineer, and he had some papers published. And I'm like, well, that's really cool, you know? And I'm like, but what's that mean? You know what I mean? Like, I've heard that phrase before, that if you're a scientist or an engineer, you have papers published. And it's like,
Somebody believed you.
right, I think that's more or less in a beat around the bush sort of way. Like, yeah, me and some other guys got together, and they're really smart, and they put it down on paper, and they cited other scientists or other engineers that came before them. And you start looking into, what's the evolution guy? Darwin, yeah. Like if you start reading his later work, he didn't even agree with himself, you know. But then if you were a scientist or a teacher in college, a professor, and you're quoting Darwin, then that's good enough.
But even in school,
Yeah, well, yeah. And like I just read the other day, which I got the Google News feed like everybody else, and I read like 100th of the headlines that I read. But one struck me as funny as they found a penguin that used to fly, but they didn't have the link between the penguins that did fly and the penguins that didn't fly, but they assumed that this one flew. And now the heading said they found a penguin that flew, but if you start reading down the article, they weren't totally sure, but I guess something to that effect. But I just think as we get closer and closer into this whole technology thing, and then it's ready to unleash on us with the transhumanism. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. Like I'm kind of doing a little bit of studying on this CRISPR, where they're gene splicing and things like that, and using CRISPR, which it stands for something, it's an acronym for something, but they're able to take, like Jurassic Park, literally, they're able to take fossilized bones, or maybe not necessarily fossilized, but more like woolly mammoths and things that they actually have tissue on, and they created some frogs or a sheep or something, I can't remember now, in South Korea. They're really big on it. And as far as just creating a human being without a mother and a father with an egg and a sperm, but you're doing it, where's the spirit in that? You know what I mean? Whereas even if it's an illegitimate child brought up in sin, there's two spirit beings coming together and creating another spirit being, as opposed to a machine and a glass test tube coming together. I just think we're creating an ultimate race of spiritless men and women. Yeah, as much as I can wrap my mind around, yeah.
This is supposed to be their whole theory about this thing is they're going to prove our creation began.
Mm-hmm.
If you get into something like this famous, some people work there testify that those are very famous. Because it's over by the Alps.
Yeah, Switzerland.
Switzerland, they've got stuff in the ground. They colliding
Atoms, yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. But even that, like, how do you know that's what you did? How do you know that's what you found? I mean, because I don't think that's what they're really doing. I mean, I believe there's something else that they're doing. They have Shiva, the goddess of destruction, which she's a Hindu god, is their statue out in front of the building. So, yeah, it's just insanity. And I'm sure if they told the average person what they were really doing, we wouldn't understand it anyways. But I don't know. Just so much going on that, like, we're exploring billions of light years away planets, but yet we don't even know what's at the bottom of our ocean. You know, we got 100,000 people a year overdosing on drugs, but we're worried about what's going on Mars. You know, we're totally out of whack. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I don't care what shape the Earth is. You know what I mean? I will never go up there to find out for myself. I don't believe the government anyways. I mean, I'm not. Oh, yeah. Right, right. I mean, like, from what I understand, the average person, no matter how much money you have, you can't just go get on a boat and go to Antarctica. Like, you'll get stopped by Air Force, U.S. Air Force will stop you, and there's a group of countries that you can't go down there if you wanted to find out if there's a edge of the Earth, and which I find that kind of ironic, but it's a controlled space. But yeah, we could go on and on and on for days about all that kind of stuff. But again, at the end of the day, Jesus never talked about any of that stuff. He didn't care. I mean, maybe we get to heaven, we'll be able to ask him some of these questions, but I don't think we'll care then either. You know what I mean? I mean, even like that, it'd be like if you asked an astronomer, like, well, where's heaven? They're going to laugh at you. Like, I don't know what you're even talking about. And then you start getting into other dimensions, and I think that's really what is more important to us, is other dimensions or other realms of existence that, I mean, there's even ancient Hebrew scholars say that there are up to 10 dimensions. 4 are knowable, 6 are unknowable to a human. And as far as like, where's heaven? Is it up in the clouds, or is it another dimension that we can't get to? I don't know, but I would assume that's more, if you believe in a space and that they were flying in and out of space through the atmosphere, eventually one of them guys would have run into heaven at one point, or, you know, in their rocket ship. So I don't know. I mean, if it's up in the clouds, like we've always been taught in Sunday school, so I don't know. But anybody else got anything? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Jesus. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that's what Danny had talked about too. Like, that was a big thing of, like, it's not to do with who's fighting who. It's my God versus your God. You know, I talked about that in the Friday night about a month or so ago about if you're, like, in World War II would have been a good example. You know, you got the Americans on one side and the Germans on the other side. You know, this American soldier over in this foxhole is not, I'll bet you his name's Klaus. I can't stand that guy. He's a, you know, no, that's just a dirty German over there, and the whole group of them you're against. And we're the good guys, you're the bad guys, and that's where we are. We're God's army against Satan's army, and we need to quit fighting amongst back and forth or worrying about the individual and realize that we're in a spiritual battle. And it doesn't matter who each one of us look like or what our individual little differences are. That doesn't really matter. When you're in the fight, that's what matters. Good. No. Yeah, the difference between a million and a billion. Yeah. Yeah. No, no, you can't even begin to. No. And I don't think they can either. We're not obviously geniuses, but even with a supercomputer. Go ahead, Zach.
I have a magazine called Acts and Facts, and there's an article in there that's talking about Yellowstone National Park and the Grand Canyon. And there's a part in the article that talks about how the trees are petrified, and they carbon dated them. We were talking about how science is trying to prove that the world is like perfect billions and years old, but this is a Christian science based magazine, and they went and carbon dated these trees, and they're literally just vertical tree trunks up and down that they prove to have been washed away by a flood, the flood,
Mm-hmm.
stuck back down in the ground vertically, because when a tree is in water and it soaks up all that water and it gets petrified, its head on one side, and that heavy side sinks, and so it pins itself down, and they carbon dated them to be thousands of years old, and our Bible says thousands of years ago, God, flooded the earth.
Yeah.
So it's kind of weird that people are using science to prove our Bible is false, but
Mm-hmm.
they're right, because the Christian scientists are proving, hey, you guys are wrong.
Right, right.
But instead, God found these things.
Which even like if you look at, I read some stuff about the Grand Canyon, and if you followed the river, the Colorado River, up to its origins, it said that its origins, for it to be originally be up here and over millions of years to get down here, it would have been going the wrong direction. You know what I mean? Like, how would that? The only way that could have been done like that was by the draining of a massive floodwaters, and its basin would have been out, I don't know, in the middle of Midwest. The flat areas out there would have been a massive lake or ocean that, when it drained out, that's what dug all that out and made that river that deep. They said for it originally to be up here on the surface, it would have been running uphill. So that really couldn't have been.